Today's lesson is poisonous plants. What you eat can make you sick. Hi, everybody. My name is Roger.
And I'm Candice.
And today we're talking about poisonous plants that you want to avoid in certain situations. We're actually talking about the fruit of certain plants. We talked about lychees, we talked about certain kinds of stone fruits, and we talked about star fruit. Lychees, of course, are common here in Taiwan, but you got to be careful with those. Don't eat the unripe ones. They could cause trouble. And, of course, fruits that have pits or stones can be trouble, especially if you eat the pits by accident. And then star fruit, of course, has a special kind of toxin in it that can be processed normally, but if you've got kidney problems, it could lead to big problems. So, yeah, you need to stay away from star fruit if you've got kidney problems.
Yeah, so now we'll turn our attention to some vegetables and nuts that you may not have known also can give you some problems, especially if you have some other health condition.
And remember, our lesson last time was all about different kinds of fruit that could be potentially harmful to us. Now we're going to talk about different kinds of food, more specifically kidney beans, cashews, and potatoes. You got to be careful with those, especially when you eat them. So let's find out about this. We'll start with kidney beans. Let's listen to the first part of our lesson right now.
Fruits aren't the only foods with chemicals that can make you sick. The following items, when eaten undercooked, uncooked, or too late, can cause illness too. Kidney beans. Legumes often make us gassy, but eating undercooked kidney beans can be especially bad for our tummies. They contain a chemical that causes diarrhea and vomiting when consumed, even in small amounts. So be sure to cook them well.
大家好，第一部分我们看到名词 diarrhea 指腹泻，像是 The man was sick with diarrhea after he ate some food that wasn't properly cooked. 该男子吃了一些未适当烹饪的食物后腹泻。或是 If you eat a large salad and then drink a glass of milk, you will probably end up with diarrhea. 如果你吃了一大份沙拉，然后再喝一杯牛奶，你可能最终会腹泻。
Okay, let's talk about the first part of our lesson for today. Fruits, or different kinds of fruit, aren't the only foods with chemicals that can make you sick. The following items, when eaten undercooked, uncooked, or too late, can cause illness too. So, yes, indeed, you've got to be careful about eating certain kinds of food based on when you eat them. If they're undercooked, if they're not cooked enough, they can cause trouble. If they're not cooked at all or raw, they can cause problems. And if they're getting a little old, maybe starting to rot a little bit, that can cause illness too. So let's first talk about kidney beans.
Legumes often make us gassy, but eating undercooked kidney beans can be especially bad for our tummies. So legumes refers to the bean family. So things like kidney beans or lentils would be part of the bean family. And when we talk about gassy, we're talking about extra air in your stomach. So usually that's quite funny because when you eat beans, they make you fart, or a better way to say it is that they make you flatulent.
Or they make you pass gas or whatever. And that reminds me of an old children's rhyme. Beans, they're good for your heart. The more that you eat, the more that you fart. Right. So that's one way to remember that. But yes, indeed, beans, they say, can make us fart. They can make us gassy. They can make us pass gas. But eating undercooked kidney beans can be especially bad for our tummies. So we all know that eating beans does make us fart, but we're going to focus specifically on kidney beans, and they can be really bad for our stomachs. Okay, so you got to be careful with them. Kidney beans, they're kind of a dark brown color, and they're not so common here in Taiwan. They are common where I'm from in the United States, but yes, indeed, they can be bad for our tummies based on when and how long you cook them.
Yeah, so you always have to remember to cook beans well all the way through. They contain a chemical that causes diarrhea and vomiting when consumed even in small amounts. So, really important rule when you're cooking beans is be sure to cook them well.
Right. Diarrhea, of course, is when you pass poop basically more in liquid form, and that's no fun. It really stinks and stuff like that. That happens when you eat bad food. So yeah, we don't like this to happen, especially if you're stuck on the bus in the middle of a traffic jam. That can be the worst time to get diarrhea. And of course, vomiting isn't so fun on a stalled bus as well. But yes, you can suffer from those symptoms, diarrhea and vomiting, when you eat kidney beans in even small amounts, so be sure to cook them well. Again, that refers to kidney beans that are undercooked, so that's because they contain a chemical that will cause those things. And yes, indeed, kidney beans need to be cooked well. You need to know what you're doing. Okay, let's move on now and talk about cashews in the second part of our lesson. We'll listen first.
Cashews. If you go nuts for cashews, then you should know that in their raw state, cashews are covered with an acid that irritates the skin and when eaten causes illness. In fact, when you buy cashews in a store, the ones labeled raw have actually been cooked, just not roasted.
第二部分我们看到单字 raw。这个字是形容词，表示食物生的或是未经烹调的。举例来说 ，You should wash your hands after handling raw chicken。处理生鸡肉后，你应该洗手。也可以说 I don't like to eat cooked tomatoes, but I think they are very good when raw。我不喜欢吃煮过的番茄，但我觉得没煮过的很好吃。接着我们看到动词 irritate。指刺激身体部位或是使发痒、疼痛。例如 Staying in the air-conditioned office for long periods irritates my nose. 长时间待在有空调的办公室里会刺激我的鼻子。或是 Mosquito bites irritate my skin. 蚊子叮咬使我的皮肤发痒。另外补充这个字的名词 irritation, I-R-R-I-T-A-T-I-O-N, irritation。意思是过敏或是疼痛，像是 The dust got in my eyes and caused irritation. 灰尘进入我的眼睛并引起过敏。也可以说 The irritation in my ankle went away when I stopped moving. 当我停止移动时，我脚踝的疼痛感就消失了。
Okay, cashews are a kind of nut, right, Candice?
Yes, they are, and one of my favorites as well. I use them in all kinds of things.
Exactly. Cashews, I think a lot of them come from India. I think I saw a documentary, women there who pick cashews and they suffer from wounds and things on their hands because cashews have some kind of chemical in them, which we'll talk about now. So if you go nuts for cashews, then you should know that in their raw state, cashews are covered with an acid that irritates the skin and when eaten causes illness. So, of course, cashews are a kind of nut, like walnuts and pecans and stuff like that. Those are all nuts. In any case, if you go nuts for something, that means you go crazy for something. So it's kind of an interesting little joke here to go nuts for nuts, to go nuts for cashews, 腰果, as you say in Chinese. And if you like them, well, you should know that if they're raw, well, they have this acid that they're covered with, and that will irritate the skin and cause illness. They will sicken you if you eat them in their raw state.
Right, and I think I saw the same documentary as you, and the women who were picking and sorting the cashews, they actually got burns on their hands from the acid of the raw cashews. So when they harvest the cashews, they have to separate the parts of the cashew, and we only really eat a small part of the whole fruit, and so that acid really damages their hands. And so for a while, I considered not eating cashews cashews anymore because of the damage it caused.
Yeah, it's kind of difficult to decide there because those women are probably making a living from treating cashews, but on the other hand, the acid is destroying their hands. But in any case, that's something you need to be aware of. Cashews in their raw state are covered with an acid. If something's raw, it's not cooked at all, and some people like to eat raw vegetables, like raw carrots, for example. People like to eat raw vegetables like carrots or celery, and they don't like to cook them. But cashews, if they're in their raw, uncooked state or condition, well, they will have an acid, and that acid will irritate the skin. And if you eat the cashews when they're raw, it can make you sick.
Yes, and it irritates the skin of the person handling them. But of course, you can imagine if that's what the acid does to the skin, then of course it's going to cause some upset to your stomach and make you really sick if you don't cook them in some way, which is what most cashew producers will do. They will cook or roast the cashews to make sure that they're safe to eat.
Acid, of course, is the opposite of alkalis or bases. So acid, of course, in Chinese is swan, and it will cause lots of problems if you don't treat the cashews properly. And in fact, when you buy cashews in a store, the ones labeled raw have actually been cooked, just not roasted. So that's something you should know if you buy cashews in a store. They might be labeled raw. To label something means to put some information on a product to tell you what it is and what company is producing it. But in this particular case, some cashews will say on the label that they are raw, but they're still actually cooked cashews. But they're just not roasted, which means they're heated over something hot like a grill or coals or something like that.
Yeah, so a lot of food that we eat is heat treated, so that will kill most germs and bacteria. But in this case, it also neutralizes the acid. Acid usually burns, but when you cook the cashews, that acid becomes milder. It means it cannot cause as much harm.
Okay, so that's another example of a poisonous plant or food that could cause problems if it's not treated properly. Hopefully someday they can figure out how to handle cashews in India without people burning their hands. Okay, now let's move on and talk about potatoes, which are quite common here in Taiwan as well. So yeah, I never knew that potatoes could be dangerous as well. Let's find out more.
Potatoes. Potatoes may seem innocent, but ones that have been sitting around for weeks can be harmful. Sprouting or turning green is an indication that a potato has developed a higher concentration of solanine, a toxin that causes stomach pain and other health problems. The toxic properties of these foods are Mother Nature's way of protecting them from insects and animals. To prevent yourself from getting sick, understand the foods you eat and how you should eat them.
第三部分我们看到单字 innocent， 这个字是形容词，指无害的、清白的或是天真的。例如 This man is innocent, he did not take your purse. 这名男子是清白的，他没有拿你的手提包。或是 The little boy looked at his parents with innocent eyes. 那个小男孩用天真的眼神看着他的爸妈。另外补充这个单字的名词 innocence， I-N-N-O-C-E-N-C-E innocence 表示纯真、无辜或是清白。举例来说 Children who grow up during war lose their innocence early in life. 在战争中长大的孩子早早就失去了他们的天真。或者The lawyer convinced the judge of Jack's innocence. 那位律师说服法官 Jack 是无辜的。接着我们看到动词 sprout， 指植物、蔬菜或是种子发芽，也可以是叶子生长。像是 Seeds planted after the last frost are expected to sprout in the spring. 最后一次霜冻后播下的种子预计将在春季发芽。也可以说The farmer is sprouting green beans as opposed to tomatoes this year. 那名农夫今年要大量种四季豆，而不是番茄。
Okay, so of course we all know what potatoes are. And potatoes may seem innocent, but ones that have been sitting around for weeks can be harmful. So when we buy potatoes in the store, they don't seem to be so dangerous. They're kind of brown, and you can peel the skin off them and boil them in water to make mashed potatoes or whatever. So potatoes seem kind of innocent. If something's innocent, that means it's harmless. It's not supposed to cause trouble. We oftentimes describe children as being innocent. They're not adults yet, so they still haven't really seen the terrible things that happen in life.
Yeah, so when we think about potatoes, we don't really think about danger because it's what we call a staple food. We see it, we use it every day. Depending on where you're from, you probably cook with potatoes every day. So anything from French fries to mashed potatoes to roast potatoes to casseroles, we use potatoes in a lot of dishes. So we're very familiar with potatoes and it is a staple. So that's why we think of them as quite innocent. We never think that they can hurt us in any way.
Exactly, but there's a problem if you leave potatoes lying around for long periods of time. It says ones that have been sitting around for weeks can be harmful. Okay, so if you buy potatoes, you need to cook them as soon as you can. Don't let them sit around for weeks because they will sprout or turn green. So sprouting or turning green is an indication that a potato has developed a higher concentration of solanine, which is a toxin that causes stomach pain and other health problems. So again, if you let these potatoes sit around for many weeks at a time, they'll eventually start sprouting, which means something will start growing out the end of them. I've seen this happen many times with garlic. If you let garlic sit around too long, it will start to sprout. A plant will start growing out of it. And in this case, the potatoes will start sprouting and they will start turning green. And if you see that, well, that's a sign or an indication that the potato has some kind of poison in it. An indication, of course, again, is a sign or a clue that something is happening.
Yeah, so usually we try to store our potatoes in a cool, dark place. So usually sprouting happens when potatoes are exposed to light. So in that case, the potatoes, if they're sitting there for weeks, then of course they're going to go through the natural process of trying to create a new plant or a baby potato, and then they start sprouting. And of course, they also turn green because of the light. And when that happens, the solanine that is already in the potato will become highly concentrated. So concentrated means a stronger or a higher amount of solanine. And of course, if you then eat a sprouting or a green potato, that could cause some stomach pain or, in some people, even more serious health problems.
Right, so concentration just means a high amount of something in a small space. So if you have a high concentration of something, sometimes you can dilute it by adding water to it. In this particular case, though, the potato has solanine, and it's got a high concentration of that chemical. And solanine is a toxin or a kind of poison that causes stomach pain. If you eat that potato, you might get terribly sick, so watch out for old potatoes. And remember, we talked about that chemical or that toxin in the potato. Solanine or solanine are dictionaries, so you can pronounce it either way. I can't imagine that word popping up in conversation too often, though, so don't worry too much about that. Okay, let's move on now to the concluding paragraph. What does it say, Candace?
The toxic properties of these foods are Mother Nature's way of protecting them from insects and animals. To prevent yourself from getting sick, understand the foods you eat and how you should eat them. So, toxic properties, the thing about a food or a fruit or a vegetable that is toxic, the elements that are toxic are Mother Nature, our Earth's way of protecting these fruits and vegetables from insects and other animals.
Right, so they've got special characteristics or special qualities or special properties. And that just means the toxic or poisonous nature of these foods. And, of course, Mother Nature intended these foods to have these properties for various reasons. They're there to protect them from insects and animals, of course. They want to survive just like everybody else, so they want to protect themselves. So, yes, indeed, you need to understand the food you eat and how you should eat them, and we certainly don't want any of you to ever get sick from eating poisonous plants. Okay, that brings us to the end of our explanation for today. Let's turn things over now to Hanny.
各位同学大家好，我是 Hanny。 我们来看今天的文法重点。课文第二部分是关于腰果。他写到说 If you go nuts for cashews, then you should know... 倘若你非常喜欢腰果，那你应该要知道... 那这边的 nut我们知道是坚果嘛，那这边应该是刻意用 nuts 来表达双关。 Nut 是坚果的复数形，那么 go nuts 则可以指可能是精神疾病的发疯，或者是为某人或某事物疯狂极度着迷，后面常常会接 for 加名词去表达为什么疯狂，为什么来着迷。好，那我们文中这个 go nuts for cashews 就是表达非常喜欢腰果的意思咯。我们顺便来整理一些 nut 的相关用法。好，第一个补充的用语是 a hard nut to crack 或者是 a tough nut to crack， 字面意思是难以敲开的坚果，那引申的意思就是棘手的事，很难对付的人。举例来说 The problem is a tough nut to crack， 这个问题啊很棘手，很难处理。第二个补充的是 nut 可以指疯子，或者是对什么很热衷的人，或是什么什么的迷。那如果我们说 a baseball nut 就是指棒球迷，很疯棒球的人哦。好，再来另外 nuts N-U-T-S 它可以当形容词来用，来描述疯狂的、发疯的，或者是无理的，意思就相当于 crazy。所以当我们用 drive somebody nuts 就相当于 drive somebody crazy， 把某人给逼疯了，让某人受不了了。好，可是 nuts 也有比较正面的用法，它可以表达对某件事非常喜爱或者是有兴趣。我们常常会用 be nuts for something 或者是 be nuts about something 来表达迷恋、热爱某事物，像是 she's nuts about cats， 她非常喜爱猫咪。那我们最后要介绍的是 when 加上现在分词 VING 或者是 when 加上过去分词 PP 的用法。我们在课文里面有看到像是 when eaten, when consumed， 它们其实是由 when they are eaten 或者是 when they are consumed 简化而来的，然后就直接在 when 的后面接了过去分词 PP 了。好，我们在 when 后面直接接分词呢，这是属于分词构句的用法。也就是说，当 when 引导的副词子句它的主词跟主要子句的主词相同的时候，我们就可以把 when 后方的主词省略，然后把接下来这个动词呢改成分词形式，形成分词构句，也就是 when 加上现在分词 VING 或是过去分词 PP。 好，那你原本那个动词如果是主动就用现在分词，如果是被动就只要保留过去分词。举例来说 My sister often tosses and turns when sleeping， 我姐姐睡觉时常常会翻来翻去。好，那这边我们讲的就是姐姐睡觉的时，然后姐姐会翻来翻去，这个主词是一样的，所以我们这边 when sleeping 其实是由 when she sleeps 简化而来。再看个例句 Ostriches don't hide their heads in the sand when threatened。 当鸵鸟受到威胁时，并不会把头藏在沙里哦。好，那句子里面这个 when threatened 就是由 when they are threatened 简化而来的。好，那以上是今天重点整理，我们回顾今天单字吧。
Raw. I don't mind cooked carrots, but I prefer to eat them raw. Acid.The acid in the solution burned the scientist's hand. Label. Henry packed away his winter clothes into boxes, which he then labeled. Roast. I roast a whole chicken for Christmas dinner every year. Innocent. Even after 9 years in prison, she insists that she is innocent. Indication. He gave us no indication at all of what was troubling him.
Discussion Starter starts now!
Here's our discussion starter for today. The question is, which food were you most surprised to learn could make you sick and why?
Well, I was really shocked to learn that eating unripe lychees could lead to brain inflammation. Since I really enjoy lychees, but I do have slightly low blood sugar.
Well, for me, I had no idea that potatoes could be troublesome if you let them sit around for too long. I had always thought that potatoes were innocent and harmless because, my goodness, potatoes are so common in the American diet as French fries and baked potatoes and hash browns and things like that. How could a potato hurt us? Yeah, something new, and I'm glad I know now. Well, that brings us to the end of another edition of our program, and please make sure you join us again next time. From all of us here, I am Roger.
I'm Candice.
See you next time.